In the heart of the American South, one man's decision shattered everything he built. A wealthy colonel, once respected and feared, made an unthinkable pact. He gave his wife to 7 enslaved men. Some say it was revenge. Others say it was madness. But the truth is darker than either. This was not just a scandal. It was the spark that burned through an entire dynasty. What drove him to betray his own name? And why did this secret stay buried for nearly 2 centuries? If stories like this fascinate you, hit like and subscribe. It helps us uncover more hidden chapters of America's forgotten past and bring truth back to light. Before the scandal that would destroy him, Colonel James Wainwright was a man of stature. His name carried weight across county lines. He owned land, commanded men, and built his reputation on discipline and control. In the antebellum South, that meant everything. Reputation wasn't just pride, it was currency. His estate stretched across hundreds of acres. Cotton fields, stables, and a mansion that seemed carved from ambition. Inside, servants moved silently. Outside, the enslaved labored from dawn until the moon rose. Every brick, every fence post, every meal, all built on forced hands and silenced voices. Wainwright wasn't born into wealth. He earned it through war, cunning, and alliances. Men called him the Colonel long after his uniform was folded away. He prided himself on command, not compassion. Yet behind that iron mask was a man terrified of losing control. The South in those years was a world built on dominance. Men owned others, but they also owned the illusion that their word was law. Betrayal, especially within one's household, could ruin a legacy faster than bankruptcy. That fear shaped every decision Wainwright made. He married a woman of grace and intelligence, someone who could elevate his standing among the local elite. Together, they seemed untouchable. Their portrait hung in the Grand Hall, 2 figures framed in wealth and confidence. But portraits lie. They hide what eyes refuse to see. Behind closed doors, Wainwright's empire was cracking. Resentment brewed, secrets deepened, and the man who once commanded everything was losing grip on his own home. The foundation he built on control was turning against him. The colonel's downfall began long before the agreement. It began the moment he confused ownership with love. At first glance, their marriage looked perfect. Colonel Wainwright and his wife, Eliza, were the picture of Southern respectability. She came from old money, a family with lineage that stretched back before the Revolution. He brought ambition, discipline, and the kind of confidence that drew whispers in drawing rooms. Together, they were a statement, power joined with elegance. But power, once shared, rarely stays balanced. Eliza was intelligent, educated, and perceptive. She understood the unspoken rules of Southern society, but she also knew when something was unjust. She had opinions that challenged her husband, questions that made him bristle. For a man like Wainwright, used to command, her independence felt like defiance. Their home became a quiet battlefield. Every dinner, every conversation was measured. Appearances mattered more than affection. Neighbors saw a charming couple hosting grand gatherings. Servants saw silence, tension, and the husband who refused to be questioned. In private, Wainwright's pride began to curdle into bitterness. He saw Eliza's grace as superiority, her calm as judgment. The more she tried to bridge the distance, the more he retreated into cold authority. What began as admiration turned to rivalry. Eliza's compassion extended beyond the house. She treated the enslaved with small acts of kindness, a gesture, a word, a moment of humanity. To Wainwright, this was betrayal. It threatened the order he built. Every act of mercy was a challenge to his control. Their marriage became a reflection of the South itself, built on hierarchy. Haunted by fear, and destined to collapse under its own contradictions. Behind the facade of wealth stood 2 people trapped by pride. each unwilling to yield. And in that silence, something dangerous began to grow. The turning point didn't come in a single moment. It crept in slowly, like rot beneath polished wood. For years, Wainwright and Eliza lived under the same roof, but in different worlds. He managed land and labor. She managed silence. The colonel's empire depended on obedience. When crops failed or debts rose, he tightened his grip. He saw rebellion everywhere, in field hands who whispered, in overseers who hesitated, and eventually in his wife's eyes. She had stopped fearing him, and that was enough to unmake him. Rumors whispered through the county that Eliza had grown distant, that she no longer stood beside her husband at church, that she spoke kindly to the enslaved when no one watched. To other men, it might have been gossip. To Wainwright, it was humiliation. Every insult, every perceived slight festered. He began drinking more, speaking less. His temper turned unpredictable. Those closest to him saw the change, but stayed silent. Power made him untouchable. Some historians believe Eliza threatened to leave. Others suggest she exposed a business secret that cost him money. Whatever the truth, by the early 1840s, Wainwright's pride was wounded beyond repair. He needed to reclaim control, to remind everyone, especially her, who held power. But when a man obsessed with dominance feels powerless, reason collapses. Pride becomes vengeance, and in that haze of wounded ego, the colonel made a decision that no rational man could justify. He would create a punishment so severe, so humiliating, that it would destroy not just Eliza's defiance, but his own humanity. That decision led to an agreement whispered about for generations. An act that crossed every moral line. Before that night, they were just names in a ledger. 7 men, bound by the same chains that defined Wainwright's fortune. They had no freedom, no voice, no choice. Yet in one night, they would be forced into a role that carried both horror and consequence. These men came from different corners of the South. Some were born on the Wainwright estate, others purchased from nearby plantations. They worked in fields, barns, and workshops. Among them were carpenters, stable hands, and one who could read, a dangerous skill for someone enslaved to Wainwright. They were property. To Eliza, they were human. She often spoke to them, asked about their families, treated them with the dignity her husband denied. That small kindness had not gone unnoticed. It was likely one of the reasons Wainwright chose them. He wanted to turn compassion into shame. Historical accounts describe their fear and confusion. None could refuse. Refusal meant death. Compliance meant eternal damnation in a system that recognized no innocence for those forced to obey. That night would mark them forever. Not as perpetrators, but as victims caught in the madness of one man's pride. Their bodies were instruments of his revenge. In later years, local stories hinted that one of the men fled north after emancipation. Another vanished, believed to have taken his life in shame. None were truly free, even after freedom came. Their story is rarely told. History often focuses on the powerful, not the powerless. But without understanding these men, their fear, their silence, we cannot understand the true horror of what Wainwright did. They were not part of the plan. They were the plan. No one knows the exact date. Some say it happened during a storm. Others recall a summer night heavy with heat, when the air itself felt suffocating. What is certain is that it began in the Great Hall, a room built for guests, now turned into a stage for cruelty. The colonel summoned the 7 men. They stood in silence, eyes lowered, understanding that disobedience meant death. Eliza was brought in next. She didn't struggle. Some accounts say she looked calm. Others say her face was blank, emptied of everything but disbelief. Wainwright spoke few words. His tone was steady, almost ritualistic. He made what he called an agreement. His wife would belong to the 7 for one night. Each man, in turn, would take what he commanded. It was not an offer. It was a decree. This was not lust. It was domination disguised as justice. In his mind, he wasn't committing sin. He was restoring order. He wanted Eliza to feel what he believed she had done to him: humiliation, loss, powerlessness. The men obeyed because they had no choice. Eliza endured because refusal meant death for all of them. There were no witnesses, only whispers that leaked through walls and servants who never spoke again. By dawn, the house was silent. The colonel sat alone in his study, bottle beside him, pistol on the desk. Eliza did not speak for days. The men were sent back to work as though nothing happened. But nothing could erase that night. What Wainwright called justice was the beginning of his ruin. Power built on cruelty always turns inward. The next morning, the plantation carried on as if nothing had changed. Orders were barked. Tools struck soil. Horses neighed in the stables. But beneath the rhythm of daily life, a new silence spread, one heavier than before. Those who lived and worked under Wainwright's rule felt it instantly. They avoided his gaze, lowered their voices, and moved with care. Word traveled in fragments. Servants whispered behind closed doors. Field hands spoke in coded phrases. Everyone knew something unspeakable had happened, though no one dared name it. Eliza did not leave her room for weeks. Food went untouched. Curtains stayed drawn. The colonel told visitors she was unwell, but even the most loyal guests sensed the lie. Her absence hung over the estate like a curse. For the 7 men, life continued under unbearable weight. Their faces carried no expression. Their silence became armor. Any sign of emotion could mean punishment. They worked, they obeyed, and they endured. The overseer's whip fell harder, as if the colonel needed to remind himself that control still belonged to him. Beyond the plantation, rumors began to reach neighboring estates. Whispers of madness, of sin, of a man who had turned against his own household. But in a society built on secrets, no one asked too much. To speak of another man's shame was to risk exposing one's own. The South was full of unspoken truths. Everyone knew where the lines were drawn and what happened to those who crossed them. Inside Wainwright's home, silence replaced trust. Every eye carried suspicion. Every voice trembled with fear. A dynasty that once commanded respect was now rotting from within. Control was all the colonel had left. But control built on fear is brittle. The more he tried to hold it, the faster it slipped away. The whispers reached town. Local merchants stopped extending credit. Old allies avoided his table. Invitations ceased. When he entered church, heads turned, but not in reverence. His wealth could buy silence, not respect. Eliza eventually emerged, pale and distant. She no longer spoke to her husband. Their rooms stayed separate. Every glance between them carried memory of that night. Some say she planned to leave. Others claim she wrote to her family, seeking refuge. Whatever she intended, it never came to pass. One evening, a fire broke out in the west barn. Whether accident or defiance, no one ever learned. The blaze destroyed a season's harvest. Insurance claims went unpaid. Debts mounted. The plantation that once symbolized strength became a monument to ruin. By the late 1840s, Wainwright was drinking heavily. His orders grew erratic. Workers fled under cover of night. Even the overseer, once loyal, resigned. The colonel began wandering the property alone, pistol in hand, muttering to himself. In the town records, his decline appears in numbers: property sold, taxes unpaid, slaves auctioned to cover debt. But numbers can't capture what pride destroyed. When Wainwright finally died, his funeral was small. No procession, no grand eulogy. Eliza did not attend. The estate passed to distant relatives who soon abandoned it. What remained was silence. and stories too shameful for the history books. The man who once ruled over hundreds couldn't rule his own heart. His empire collapsed because it was never built on love, only fear after the colonel's death. The estate stood like a ghost. The mansion's shutters cracked. Vines crawled up its walls. Locals avoided it after dark. They said the air carried voices, a woman's cry, a man's whisper, the echo of chains. Whether true or not, no one dared go near. Eliza left soon after. Some accounts say she joined her sister in Charleston. Others claim she lived quietly under another name. Her story vanished in census records, erased by choice or shame. What she endured became family rumor, not history. The 7 men were scattered. Some sold to other plantations. One was freed decades later, old and broken, his memory fogged by time. In rare testimony passed through oral tradition, descendants spoke of a night of great sorrow that marked their bloodline. They didn't name Wainwright. They didn't need to. For generations, the tale survived in fragments. Old families whispered it as a warning, not against cruelty, but against exposure. Southern pride buried sin beneath etiquette and denial. But secrets like this never stay buried. When historians later examined plantation archives, they found inconsistencies, names removed, transactions unexplained. Something had been erased deliberately, and in those gaps, the truth took shape. The Wainwright descendants who remained refused to speak. Even in the 20th century, when reporters came asking, doors stayed closed. One elderly relative reportedly said, "Some stories should die, but stories like this never do. They linger in silence, in the walls of abandoned homes, in the unease of a town that knows but won't admit." The colonel's legacy wasn't land or lineage. It was a wound, inherited, unhealed, and unforgettable. When historians finally revisited the Wainwright story, they faced a dilemma. There were no court records, no signed confessions, only fragments, letters, diary entries, plantation logs with missing names. But the silence itself spoke volumes. What kind of man erases his own past so thoroughly? Some scholars called it myth, a moral tale exaggerated by time. Others, studying the fragments, saw too much precision in the details to dismiss it. The dates matched. The estate existed. The witnesses, though unnamed, aligned. Truth often hides between what's written and what's missing. For decades, Southern history avoided such stories. Textbooks praised courage, not cruelty. The dark corners of slavery were tidied away, stripped of the intimate horrors that defined them. Yet stories like Wainwright's force a reckoning. They reveal how power twisted ordinary people into monsters, how silence protected them, and how memory itself can be shaped to serve pride. Modern historians now treat the case as both caution and symbol. It represents the cost of unchecked power, the violence bred by ego, and the way oppression corrupts even the oppressor. What Wainwright did wasn't madness in isolation. It was the logical extreme of a system that measured worth by ownership dot in public records. His name faded. No monuments, no preservation plaques, only decay. But among local historians, his story endures as a mirror, reflecting what polite society once refused to see. The debate continues. Was he driven by jealousy, vengeance, or something deeper? The answer matters less than the truth it reveals. Power without conscience always ends. The same way, in ruin, the Wainwright story is not just about one man. It's about a nation built on contradictions. A country that spoke of freedom while living off bondage. A society that praised honor but hid its cruelty behind manners and prayer. What the colonel did was extreme, but it wasn't born in isolation. His act grew from soil already poisoned, a culture that told men they owned everything, even the bodies of others. When control was threatened, violence followed. When shame loomed, silence became survival. Eliza's suffering reminds us that women, even within privilege, were trapped in their own kind of captivity. Her voice was erased not only by her husband, but by a history that recorded property deeds and battle dates, yet ignored pain that didn't serve pride. The 7 men represent millions, people stripped of humanity, forced into choices that weren't choices at all. Their silence is not consent. It's the sound of fear passed down through generations, echoing in families who still carry names they never chose. This story forces a question few want to ask: what happens to a nation that refuses to face the darkness in its foundation? The answer is visible in every wound that never healed, in inequality, in denial, in the myths still taught as heritage. Wainwright's house may be gone, but its shadow remains. It stands wherever power demands obedience, wherever cruelty hides behind respectability, wherever silence protects the guilty. History doesn't erase truth. It waits. And when silence breaks, stories like this remind us that reckoning is not punishment. It's the first step toward understanding. The Colonel's empire died, but the lesson endures. If this story unsettled you, it should. Because history's darkest moments aren't just about what was done, but what was allowed. The Colonel's cruelty may be buried in time, yet its echoes live on, in silence and denial, in every truth we hesitate to face. If you believe stories like this deserve to be remembered, like this video, subscribe, and share it. Only by confronting the past can we stop repeating it. Confronting the past can we stop repeating it.